Next, from Springfield, House Speaker Michael Madigan responds to the governor's State of the State address.
Further questions, I have some opening remarks, and it's a follow-up to the governor's comments during his speech, where he talked in terms of accomplishments where there had been cooperation with the members of the legislature. And I'd like to highlight 4 of those areas and then make a point. Number 1, the governor talked in terms of record K through 12 spending, record spending for elementary and secondary education. Number 2, the governor talked in terms of the correction to the FY15 budget. 3, he talked in terms of landmark public safety legislation such as body cameras and other police reforms. And lastly, he talked in terms of unemployment insurance, which happened through what we call the agreed bill process. All of these things happened. All of these happened with cooperation with people in the legislature. And in each instance, please understand, the governor did not demand his program, which would lower wages for middle-class families and their standard of living and send injured workers to welfare and to the emergency room. So again, these 4 areas happened. There was cooperation. Please note, at no time during the deliberation on these issues did the governor lay down his current demand that his program be enacted, a program which would bring down the wages and the standard of living of middle-class families and send injured workers to welfare and to the emergency room. Okay, questions? Well, I think it's interesting that you make the point that the governor's speech did not deal with the fact that there is no budget for the current fiscal year. It's very interesting that the governor would come before a joint session of the General Assembly speaking to the state of the state of Illinois and decline to comment that we don't have a full budget for this particular fiscal year. I certainly would have appreciated it had he done that, had he offered some comment as to why that hasn't happened.
Mr. Speaker, what do you think of the governor saying how non-competitive Illinois is versus other states?
Well, that's the governor's program, which would bring down the wages and the standard of living of middle-class families and send injured workers to welfare and to the emergency room. That's his program.
How was his first year compared with all the other governors you've watched, Mr. Speaker?
I found it very interesting
In what respect?
in a lot of respects.
The governor is characterizing this as an olive branch, open door conciliation. Did you hear a hand extended? Did you hear notes of conciliation in this speech?
You may recall at the time of the legislative inauguration in January of 2015, I pledged to work cooperatively with Governor Rauner. I pledged to work with him cooperatively and professionally, and I've renewed that pledge on several occasions, including today. So I stand ready to work on any problem facing the government of the state of Illinois. And I would say again that where we've come together and worked together without the governor's demand that we enact his program, which would bring down the wages and the standard of living of middle-class families, that we've accomplished a great deal.
But did you find the governor's speech cooperative and reasonable? Did you find the language in the speech that he used cooperative and reasonable?
I found it very interesting. I followed every word in his speech. And you do know that we are in continuous session, don't you?
What did you make about his attacks on Democratic allies on labor and absentee being paid too much, and also a lot of trial lawyers that are here with them?
My goal is to work professionally and cooperatively with the governor. We have some very serious problems, as these people have spoken to. You heard the comments of the people that are standing behind me. These are very serious problems. They all relate to budget making, to the continuing deficit of the state of Illinois, and that's what we ought to address. We ought to get busy, sit down. What can we do to solve this budget problem? I've said consistently that what we need to do is some cuts in state spending, such as Senate Bill 788, which would have reduced the Medicaid program by $400 million. But at the same time, I've said publicly that I would be prepared to support more taxes on the wealthy. I'm prepared to do that. But it's got to be a balanced approach.
You said you use a supermajority to pass a tax on your own. You said
Yeah.
just now that your supermajority is.
You know, his statement that the Democrats on their own would pass a tax increase is just not realistic. It just doesn't bear scrutiny here in the Capitol. But you're here quite a bit, you know that.
Speaker, there were a lot of people on the Republican side of the aisle clapping throughout the speech, but
Sure.
there was one of your members also joining them, Representative Duncan. Do you have
Hmm.
anything to say about that? And does that speak to your supermajority not being as strong as some believe?
You know, this is America, and we still have freedom in this country, and people are free to applaud when they want to applaud and not applaud when they don't want to applaud.
So you don't have as much control as.
I don't have as much control as certain people in the media have claimed for years.
You talked about
Why
a
is he allowed
tax
to
on the
caucus
wealthy.
still? Well, why is Ken Duncan allowed in your caucus?
That's a good question.
Are you thinking about not letting that happen?
I just think it's a good question.
Well, Mr. Speaker,
What's the
speaking of
answer?
Excuse me, now, we've had a little bit from
But I
you.
talked to you about CPS
Sure.
and the plan that the Republicans proposed and
Yeah.
taking over and
Yeah.
perhaps bankruptcy, and I have a follow-up.
Yeah. Well, number one, I read a summary of the bills that would provide for the bailout of the Chicago school system. I haven't had a chance to really analyze the bills and to fully appreciate how they would work and what the impact would be. But I do find it very interesting that the governor and his Republican allies in the legislature are proposing a bailout of the Chicago school system.
Would that be a good idea to take over for the state?
Well, that's what I'd like to have some time before I can render a judgment, but it clearly would be a bailout.
You've met with Pierre Lewis privately, I've been told. How did that go, and where do you see the CPS contract and
Yeah.
CTE going?
They're in bargaining today. They've been in bargaining for several weeks. The latest reports are that the current bargaining appears to be done in good faith on both sides. They're attempting to move to an agreement which would provide for an extension of the contract. I don't know all of the details, and I'm clearly not in a position to be commenting on what's being discussed in collective bargaining.
Speaker, can you address, speaking of education, the governor proposed withholding state dollars if there's not cost savings, or maybe giving state dollars to the person if there are cost savings? Can you address that?
Well, our interest is in the state budget making. And in the spring and in May, we adopted a state budget that would have provided support for all elements of education, from elementary and secondary through high school, community colleges, the universities. We're really not in the position to be commenting on the governor's remarks of today.
What about the P3 that he's talking about? There was an agreement, you guys kind of altered his.
Well, there are numerous groups that work to improve education. They should all be lauded, and they do good work. And from time to time, there are proposed changes in the composition and the arrangement of these groups. We should just maintain an open mind on that. The important point is there are so many Illinoisans that are willing to volunteer to improve the quality of education and the quality of instructions that we ought to bring them in and work with them. The governor talked in terms of working again with President Cullerton, which is a good thing, in the area of education. And I would like to point out that in the House, we've had a bipartisan group chaired by the Majority Leader, Representative Curry, for several months. And it's bipartisan. We've reached out to every member of the House, regardless of where their district is located, regardless of their political party. And our goal is to do a real good study of the school aid formula and the total method of distribution of the school money, with a view toward where we can correct inadequacies, where we can correct deficiencies, and just do a much better job where the state is called upon to support education, especially at the level of elementary and secondary education.
Speaker, you talked about a tax on the wealthy. Is that the millionaire tax, or do you want to expand that? Because that doesn't seem like it would be anywhere near enough to fill the budgetary gap that Illinois is facing right now.
Well, it's all part of my position, which you've heard on several occasions, which I don't think you can simply cut your way out of the budget problem. I think you need a balanced approach. You need cuts such as Senate Bill 788, which would have cut a K program by $400 million. And you need new revenue. And in terms of finding new revenue, I've said consistently that I'm prepared to negotiate with the governor, but I do believe that as part of a revenue package that we ought to have increased taxes on the wealthy of Illinois.
Speaker, have you offered anything in exchange? Because a lot of people criticize your position that you're not giving up anything and you're expecting the governor to come all the way to your position.
Yeah.
Would you say whether that's true? And number two, if I might, before any of this is resolved, we might have any number of social service agencies that are permanently out of business, some schools collapse. Would you be willing to move a funding bill? Because the only two groups that are really getting slammed by this standoff are social service agencies and higher education. Would you move a bill to fund those so that they don't go out of business in the meantime?
To quote one of our witnesses, you'll recall that the legislature in May passed the complete budget. And that budget would have provided funding for these areas.
In fact, it doesn't help now.
And I'm sure you know that under the Illinois Constitution, the governor is given great veto power. So number one, he can exercise a complete veto. Number two, he can do a reduction veto in the area of appropriations. Number three, he can do a line item veto in the area of appropriations. When the governor got that budget in May, he could have exercised all of those powers under the Constitution. He could have refashioned that budget to his liking, and he would have been in a position to continue support for the agencies of the people that are standing behind
He
him.
did not do that.
Right.
Would you move a bill to fund these people to keep them viable until the standoff is worked out?
Now, let me address your question about meeting the governor halfway, because we have done that. As an example, the governor spent a lot of time today talking about workers' compensation. And what he means is he wants to reduce the benefit level in workers' compensation. He wants to send injured workers to welfare into the emergency room. The House has passed a workers' compensation bill. We've done changes in the system. We acknowledge there are changes that could be done in the workers' compensation system, and they ought to be done. The House bill also provided for rate regulation of the insurance companies that sell workers' compensation insurance. There have been studies in the last few months, they're acknowledged, they're agreed to, that the cost of workers' compensation in Illinois has come down since 2011. But the rates charged for the insurance have not come down. To me, that says we ought to do rate regulation of insurance companies selling workers' compensation insurance in Illinois, as is done in a majority of the states in the country. That's number one. Number two, the governor talked in terms of wanting to privatize the operation of the Illinois Economic Development Agency, which is the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. The House passed a bill working with the governor. We worked with him. We exchanged ideas. We negotiated. We gave him what he wanted. We put one item in there that he didn't agree to, which was what we call a 3-year sunset, which would be an automatic review of what would be happening under privatization of this agency. Privatization has happened all over the country. The results are a mixed bag. In Wisconsin, under Governor Scott Walker, there was a huge scandal where the governor was the chair of the board taking campaign contributions from companies getting benefits from the board. The scandal was such that the governor had to resign from the board and move new legislation to remove the governor from the board. These agencies are a mixed bag. And so my request was, Governor, we'll give you what you want, but 3 years from now, let's do an automatic review to see if it's working. If it's not working, then we'll move in a different direction. Governor talked in terms of reducing property taxes. In the House, we've called legislation that would freeze property taxes 17 times. 17 times. On all 17 occasions, about 40 Democrats voted for the bill. Close to 0 Republicans. So if the governor wanted a freeze in property taxes, he could have instructed the House Republicans to support this bill, be over in the Senate under serious consideration in the Senate. Next, the governor complained that the members of the legislature were going to get an anticipated COLA adjustment. We moved legislation to suspend the anticipated COLA adjustment and at the same time kept it a level the, what's called the per diem and the travel allowances. And then lastly, again, where we've worked cooperatively with the governor, we've talked about the absence of the state budget for Illinois, but since Rauner became the governor on 3 occasions, we've done budget making. We've done appropriation bills that he signed 3 times. At the very beginning, he complained that then budget was out of balance and it needed a correction. We sat down, we talked, negotiated, we exchanged ideas. We sent the bill to the governor, he signed the bill. He lauded the bill today, number 1. Number 2, later, the governor requested that we pass a bill to appropriate federal money, which we did, and in response to his further request, we put money in there for McCormick Place on its bond payments. Lastly, just in December, there was a bill being advanced by Representative Moylan that would have provided appropriation for money which really belonged to local governments. We were prepared to move the bill. The governor gave us a request, add items for the operations of state government. Again, we talked, exchanged ideas, fashioned the bill, sent the bill to the governor, he signed the bill. What's significant in all 3 instances where these things did happen is at no time did the governor lay down his demand that he get his agenda, which would bring down the wages and the standard of living of middle-class families and send injured workers welfare into the emergency room. All 3 instances. At no time did he lay down that demand. So I think we have a real good prescription for solving our problems, which would be for the governor to take a little different view of what should be done in terms of this agenda that he's got for middle-class families.
Speaker, was there anything that you heard today?
Speaker, is there any scenario you can see where this budget impasse drags beyond November?
Well, you'll recall, the legislature passed the budget in May. The legislature passed the budget in May. It was a good spending plan. I publicly acknowledged at the time that we didn't have the money to pay for the budget that we sent to the governor, but we were prepared to negotiate with the governor to find new revenue for the state. I'm still prepared to do that. I would say, as I said earlier, that we need a balanced approach. We need to reduce some spending, and at the same time, we need to raise taxes on the wealthy.
But if he doesn't budge, do you see this dragging past the
Well,
election?
I would hope it doesn't. I mean, I've been prepared to work on these issues since January of 2015.
Did you hear anything today, Speaker?
In his education plan, something there offset the background in his 10-point description.
Sure, I listened to the 10-point description. The staff did a good job in putting that together. We support MAP grants. You know, the Democrats in the legislature support MAP grants. There should be no doubt about that. That's money for poor children to get a college education.
Is there a bill coming? We've been hearing that there's a Democratic bill coming on that soon, separate bill, and maybe the Republicans will have a separate proposal on that as well.
3 o'clock, right?
Yeah, there will be a bill in House Committee today at 3 o'clock that would appropriate for the MAP grants and for the community colleges.
Speaker,
Today,
Amanda?
This week, friends of Michael Madigan dropped a mailer on Jason Gonzalez. Your members have primaries or general elections. You strongly encourage them to walk precincts every day. Have you been walking precincts?
I've done some walking. Yeah, I've been very well received.
Do you plan to continue that?
We're waging a strong campaign in House District 22. We expect to be successful. Yeah.
Speaker, it appears as if, although the effort that you've addressed, the partial privatization of DCEO stalled in the legislature, Rauner says he's filed articles of incorporation to do evidently some form of solely private, or I don't quite know how that will work. What are your thoughts on going that route?
Well, I'd be interested to know what the connection will be with the government. So the way I heard it, he's going to gather together a group outside of the government. I believe that Mayor Emanuel has done this in Chicago. And that's fine as it goes, but then I like to know what'll be the connection between this group and what happens over at the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity.
Mr. Speaker, what's the likelihood that this budget, 2016, has to get wrapped into 2017, which is going to start, we're going to hear about next month?
You know, that shouldn't happen. It could have been avoided back in May and June when, you know, the governor could have used his power under the Constitution to do a reduction veto, line item veto.
But is it likely now?
Speaker, do you have any comment on CPS's inability to borrow?
I don't think he is. I'm not focused on the personalities. I'm not focused on divide and conquer. I'm focused on these issues. I've spent a great deal of time to understand the issues. I'm prepared to work on the issues. I think they're of great significance. And I think that the longer we wait, the more damage we do. So we got to get about the business of correcting the fiscal problems of the state of Illinois.
Did you hear anything today that means year 2 is going to be any better? Did you hear any sort of thing today?
Well, I had a pleasant experience here with the media, so that's encouraging.
Thanks, everybody. Hey, your wife clashed at term limits. What do you think of that?
My wife, what?
Clashed when the governor said term limits. I have a wonderful wife. Is there a story there?